I was 17 years old when I realized something was seriously wrong at my job. At the time, I didn't even know what to call it. I just knew it made my skin crawl. I had been working at a small local coffee shop for about 6 months. It wasn't a chain. It was one of those cozy places with handwritten menus, baked goods made in-house, and regular customers who knew your name. It was my first real job, and for the most part, I liked it. Most of my coworkers were around my age. A few were in their early 20s. Then there was Joe. Joe was older. I didn't know his exact age, but I guessed somewhere in his 30s. He wasn't a manager, but he was higher up than me. He trained new employees, handled inventory, and baked a lot of the pastries we sold. People treated him like he knew what he was doing. He was also strange. Not dangerous strange, just awkward. He didn't always understand social cues. Sometimes he'd linger in conversations too long or say things that made people pause before responding. But no one thought much of it. He was just that guy. Until he wasn't. It started on a slow day. There were only 3 of us working, me, Joe, and another coworker who was 19. We were killing time behind the counter, talking about random stuff like you do when the shop is empty. Somehow the conversation turned to double-jointed people. The other guy mentioned something about being able to lick your elbow. I laughed and said something stupid like how you can't actually feel it if someone licks your elbow when you're not looking. I meant it as a random fact. A throwaway comment. I didn't think anything of it. That was my mistake. Later that shift, I felt someone standing too close behind me. Before I could turn around, I heard this faint, wet sound near my arm. I spun around. Joe was crouched slightly, pulling his head back like a kid who'd just been caught doing something dumb. He had tried to lick my elbow. I stared at him, completely stunned. He laughed awkwardly and said something like, "See? You didn't feel it." I told him firmly to stop. I said it was weird and uncomfortable. He nodded, acted embarrassed. I assumed that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next time we worked together, I caught him again. This time I felt the movement more clearly. His face was close to my arm. I jumped and told him to stop, again. I wasn't laughing. I wasn't joking. I made it very clear that I didn't like it. He said okay, then he did it again. Not once, not twice, but multiple times a shift, 3 or more times a day. Every time we worked together. He always waited until no one was looking. He'd hover behind me, crouch down, and either try to lick my elbow or actually do it. Sometimes I'd catch him mid-attempt. Sometimes I'd feel it and whip around. Every time I told him to stop. Every time he didn't, I started feeling paranoid at work. I'd flinch whenever someone stood behind me. I'd constantly check my surroundings. I hated turning my back to the counter. And the worst part was how ridiculous it sounded. How do you explain to someone that a grown man is repeatedly licking your elbow? I kept telling myself it was immature, that it was dumb, that maybe I was overreacting. But then I'd turn around and see a man twice my age crouching behind me, tongue out, like it was some kind of joke, and I would feel sick. I didn't know who to talk to. The shop had 2 co-owners, a married couple, but they weren't there often. Most days their kids, who were in their 20s, ran things. I didn't know if they'd take me seriously or think I was messing around. I was embarrassed. I was uncomfortable. And I was 17, trying to navigate a situation no one prepares you for. I started wondering if I should yell at him. Or make a scene, or just quit. But then I'd think about how unfair that felt. Why should I be the one to leave? I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't flirting. I wasn't encouraging it. I was telling him to stop, clearly, repeatedly, and firmly. And he wasn't listening. I finally realized something important. It didn't matter if it sounded silly. It didn't matter if it wasn't violent. It didn't matter if he thought it was a game. I was being touched without my consent. At work, by an adult man. And I had no idea how much worse it was about to get, or how quickly it would finally be taken seriously. I started dreading my shifts. Not because of the work. Not because of customers. But because every time I saw Joe's name on the schedule next to mine, my stomach dropped. I changed how I moved at work. I kept my back against counters. I positioned myself near other coworkers whenever possible. I tried to stay busy so there was always someone nearby. But it didn't matter. He always found a moment. If I turned to grab cups, he'd hover. If I leaned forward to wipe the counter, he'd crouch. If I was focused on the register, he'd inch closer. And every time that same disgusting attempt. Sometimes I'd catch him mid-motion. Sometimes I'd feel it, the faint, gross sensation on my skin, and spin around in shock. Each time I told him to stop. Each time he acted like he didn't understand why it was a big deal. Once, after I snapped at him again, he laughed nervously and said something like, "It's just a joke," that made it worse. Because jokes are supposed to be funny. And nothing about this was funny. I started questioning myself. I wondered if maybe I'd said something wrong that first day. If mentioning the elbow thing somehow invited this. That thought made me angry, at him and at myself for even considering it. I hadn't consented to this. I had repeatedly said no. That should have been the end of it. I went home one night and couldn't stop thinking about how powerless I felt. I was 17. He was a grown man. He had authority at work. And I felt stupid trying to explain something that sounded like a bad joke. "A guy keeps licking my elbow" didn't sound like harassment when you said it out loud. But it felt like it. I decided to ask for advice anonymously. I wrote everything down, How old I was, how old he was, how often it happened, how I had told him to stop multiple times, how it always happened when no one was looking, how uncomfortable and embarrassed I felt. I didn't know what I expected. What I got was overwhelming. People didn't laugh. They didn't minimize it. They didn't say I was overreacting. They were furious. Strangers told me over and over that this was sexual harassment, that his age made it worse, that the fact I had said no made it undeniable, that this wasn't awkward behavior, it was inappropriate, predatory, and unacceptable. Some people told me to go straight to my boss. Others suggested making a scene the next time it happened. Screaming, flailing, making sure other people saw what he was doing. Someone even joked about elbowing him in the face, and while I laughed at that, it also made me realize how angry people were on my behalf. That was when it hit me. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't silly. This wasn't just a joke. A grown man was repeatedly licking a teenage coworker after being told to stop. Seeing it written out like that made my chest tighten. I still felt scared to say something in real life, but now I felt validated. I felt like I wasn't imagining things, like I had permission to take myself seriously. I decided that if it happened again, I wouldn't brush it off. The next shift we worked together, I was tense the entire time. I kept my guard up, waiting. It didn't take long. I was turned away, restocking lids when I felt movement behind me. Before he even got close enough to try, I spun around. I snapped. I told him loudly to stop. I said I had told him multiple times. I said it was gross and inappropriate. I didn't yell, but my voice carried. Other people heard. He looked startled, embarrassed, like he hadn't expected to be called out in front of others. He mumbled something and backed off. For the rest of the shift, he avoided me. I went home shaking. Not because I was scared of him, but because standing up for myself felt terrifying. I kept replaying the moment in my head, worrying I'd gone too far. I hadn't. A few days later, something unexpected happened. One of the co-owners came in. She didn't usually work that shift. Toward the end of the day, she asked if she could talk to me privately. My heart started pounding. She told me that one of her kids, who helped run the shop, had noticed something off. They'd seen me look upset and frustrated around Joe. They had brought it to her attention. She asked me gently what was going on. I felt my face burn. I was embarrassed all over again. But this time I told the truth. I explained that Joe had been trying to lick my elbow, that he had done it repeatedly, that I had told him to stop multiple times, that it made me extremely uncomfortable. I braced myself for disbelief. Instead, her expression hardened. She told me immediately that what he was doing was completely inappropriate. Not just at work, but in any social setting. She said an adult man should know better. She apologized that it had gone on as long as it did. She asked me if I wanted to take legal action. That question stunned me. I said no. At the time, I didn't think of it as something that serious. I just wanted it to stop. I wanted to feel safe at work again. She told me she understood. Then she told me something that made my hands go cold. Joe was being let go. She said they would also be speaking to everyone at the shop about appropriate workplace behavior, and that she did not ever want to have to explain sexual harassment to anyone again. I left that conversation in a daze. Part of me felt relieved. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me felt angry that it had taken this long. But most of all, I felt heard. For the first time since it started, someone had believed me without hesitation. And the situation was finally being handled by the adults who were supposed to protect me. I didn't realize it yet, but the hardest part was already over. Joe never came back to work. There wasn't a big announcement, no dramatic confrontation. One day he was on the schedule, and the next day he wasn't. Word spread quietly among the staff. The co-owner held a meeting with everyone. She explained what behavior was appropriate and what wasn't. She didn't go into graphic detail, but she made it clear that any form of unwanted touching, joking or not, would not be tolerated. She said she never wanted to have to explain sexual harassment to anyone again. Hearing those words out loud made everything feel more real. Sexual harassment. That label felt heavy. Up until that point, I'd been thinking of it as annoying, immature, uncomfortable, something awkward that I just needed to deal with. But once someone else called it what it was, I couldn't unsee it. He wasn't being silly. He wasn't misunderstanding a joke. He was a grown man repeatedly touching a 17-year-old coworker after being told to stop. The age difference hit me differently after that meeting. At the time, I hadn't focused on it. I just knew he was older. But once I stepped back and really looked at it, someone in his 30s doing that to a minor, it made my stomach twist. I thought about how I'd been embarrassed to report it because it sounded weird. That's the part that stuck with me. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded almost funny. And that made me doubt myself. That made me hesitate. I kept imagining how easy it would have been for someone to laugh and brush it off. To say, oh, that's just Joe being awkward. To tell me I was being dramatic. But no one did. My coworkers were supportive. No one blamed me. No one made jokes about it. A few people quietly admitted they'd noticed he hovered too close sometimes. Nothing like what I experienced, but enough that they weren't surprised something was wrong. That helped more than I expected. For days after he was fired, I felt lighter at work. I stopped flinching when someone stood behind me. I stopped constantly checking my surroundings. I stopped feeling like I had to brace myself every shift. The shop felt normal again. And that's when the anger crept in, not explosive anger. Just a slow realization. I had been managing someone else's inappropriate behavior for weeks. I had been adjusting my movements, my positioning, my comfort, to accommodate someone who ignored my boundaries. And I had done it quietly. I had minimized it in my own head because it didn't seem serious enough. I kept thinking about how many times I'd told him to stop, firmly, clearly, repeatedly. He didn't misunderstand, he didn't forget. He just didn't care. That part bothered me more than anything else. When the co-owner asked if I wanted to pursue legal action, I said no because at the time it felt extreme. I just wanted it to be over. Looking back, I understand why she offered. Because once someone ignores a clear boundary like that, especially with that kind of age difference and power dynamic, it stops being awkward and starts being dangerous. I was lucky. Lucky that a coworker noticed I looked uncomfortable. Lucky that the owners took it seriously. Lucky that it stopped when it did. It could have gone on longer. It could have escalated. It could have been worse. For a while after everything settled, I caught myself laughing about it with friends. Remember the elbow licker? It sounded absurd when you said it like that. But underneath the humor was something important. I learned that just because something sounds silly doesn't mean it isn't serious. Harassment doesn't have to look dramatic or violent to count. Sometimes it looks like someone crouching behind you when they think no one's watching. Sometimes it looks like being told you're overreacting. Sometimes it looks like doubting yourself because you don't want to make a big deal out of something small. I'm glad. I spoke up. I'm glad someone listened. And I'm glad I learned at 17 that my discomfort is enough. I don't have to justify it. I don't have to make it make sense. If I say stop, it means stop. And anyone who ignores that doesn't deserve to stand behind me, at work or anywhere else.